I'm not going to talk about the fashion and lifestyle kind of portraits. This video is about portraits that bring out someone's personality. Portraits that capture mood and atmosphere and what you need to do to achieve that. These are 7 portrait photography tips that are important for me when shooting a documentary project. When I'm making a documentary or when I'm just walking around in the streets and I see someone interesting, the first thing I do is ask, of course. And when someone agrees to have their photo taken, it's important to make them feel comfortable, because it's not because someone agrees to have their photo taken that they won't feel awkward in front of the camera. Most people don't like to be in front of the camera, but weirdly enough, those are the best subjects for a good portrait. People who love to have their photo taken may seem very comfortable and everything, but a lot of times they don't show their true self. Like these guys, for example. It doesn't happen very often, but they loved it, and they thought it would be a good idea to come up with some creative poses. They immediately start to take over the photo shoot, and they tell you what they want the photo to look like. It took me a while before I could get a good photo of them. Usually I just let them do their thing before I start guiding them. Anyway, when you're setting up your camera or when you're looking for the right background, don't leave your subject just standing there waiting. Because to them, it almost feels like an execution. Instead, talk to them. No deep conversation, just simple questions like, do you live here? Or how's your day going? Don't create an awkward silence when it's time to take photos. Usually, I just keep talking while taking photos. Because as soon as you say, okay, I'm gonna take a photo now, they put on a mask and they start smiling awkwardly or they don't know what to do. And that brings us to the next tip. Usually a smile is a mask, and I rarely want my subject to smile in front of the camera. But even when you tell them that they don't have to smile and that they don't have to do anything special, they might still feel very awkward. Time your shot. If you can get a good photo while guiding and directing them, make a photo while they're not thinking about it. Take a photo after you've told them that you're gonna check the settings in the camera, for example, or ask them something like, hey, what's that over there? And take the shot when they turn their head back towards the camera. I took all these photos while talking to the subject, and it might not look like it, but I captured them in the middle of a conversation. A lot of times it helps to use the screen instead of the viewfinder to focus and frame the shot. That way your subject can actually talk to you instead of a camera, and it feels less awkward. Now, there are 2 options. Do you want your subject to look into the lens or away from it? Usually, when your subject looks away from the camera, it feels more intimate, and there's also more room for story. What are they looking at and why? What are they thinking? In a way, it feels like you're looking into someone's life through a window, like a movie still. When the subject is looking straight into the lens, there's a connection with the viewer, and it's more about who is that person. That connection makes the viewer wonder more about the personality of the person in the photo. A full body portrait tells a different story compared to a close-up. When you take a close-up, it's all about that person's face and their eyes. Their personality is the focus of the photo. But when you take a step back, again there's more room for story. I like to make full body portraits because I find that what kind of shoes someone wears or their posture is just as important as their face. It tells something about that person. That's why full body portraits work really well for documentaries, and close-ups work really well if the viewer already knows that person, or as part of a series, where other photos tell something more about the person. You can also go for a half-body portrait, like I did here. I did it like this because I wanted to show the details in his face, but still keep the story around him. In any case, you have to decide what you want to show and what you want to communicate with the viewer. And depending on that, you have to decide if you want to crop information out or include it. And no, I don't mean focus on the background. What I want to say is that the background is important, and you can use a specific background to tell the story. You can also, of course, choose not to use a background. But when the background is important, make sure it's in focus, or at least not so blurry that you can't see what it is. if you want to take a photo in someone's house or their office, for example, and you want to show that environment. Then there's also just the general aesthetics of the photo. The background can make the subject stand out more and just make the photo more beautiful and engaging. If the background doesn't have a story to tell, I usually try to find a clean background. This way, the focus is on the subject. I either like a very clean background or a very deep background, where I can let the shallow depth of field do the work. Either way, don't be afraid to direct your subject and tell them where to stand, because the background can make your photos so much better. While I do think that you can make good photos in any kind of light, for portraits I do prefer soft light. For all my documentary projects, I made sure that I had soft light available. And that meant either going out in the morning or in the evening. And for my project Behind the Redwood Curtain, for example, I was very lucky that it was very foggy until noon every day, which created very soft light but also very soft backgrounds, and everything added to the story and the atmosphere I wanted to show. Indoors, the light of a window always works really well. Just make sure that the sun is not hitting the window directly. I never use flash or extra lights for portraits, but sometimes you have to improvise and adapt to make it work. Okay, so we all know that you don't need the best gear to make great photos, but for portraits, different lenses do get different results. Usually the rule is something like an 85mm for headshots and a 35 or 50mm for wider shots, but why not switch it around? Here, for example, I used an 85mm at f1.8 for a full body portrait, and I think it worked really well. But also using a 35mm for a close-up can work if you want to emphasize the features a little bit more, for example. It all depends on what you want the result to look like. And that's it, guys. 7 portrait photography tips that are important for me when shooting a documentary project. Now, I would love to see some of your portraits, so don't hesitate to link them in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this video, share, like, subscribe, and see you next time.